Hey, thanks for stopping by. This is Tom, and this is Tom's Radio Room Show. And I got a few questions about single sideband and single sideband tuning. Now, I did a show quite a while ago about what single sideband is. So I'm not going to go through the explanation of it. I'll just say that typically single sideband operation is used by amateur radio operators, by military communications, pirates use single sideband. One of the reasons to use single sideband when you're broadcasting is it gives you more concentrated signal in a smaller bandwidth. So you're just using a sideband instead of using the full typical width of a transmitter. That's just it in a nutshell. I'm probably totally not accurate in that definition, but that's why it's used in those cases, so they can get their signal to go out further and to be stronger. A lot of radios don't have a single sideband mode. Typically, your inexpensive radios, which are made primarily to listen to international broadcast bands, and they don't use single sideband in their transmission, they won't have single sideband. But if you want to listen to amateur radio operators, they almost always operate in single sideband if they're operating in voice mode. Now, nowadays, a lot of the amateur operators use data. They use data transfer, using their computer to send out packets of data. Again, they can get more distance out of that. So I'm just going to quickly show you tuning single sideband. Might not be the best method, but it's just the method I use. And right now we're on the 80 meter band, amateur radio band, and we're at 3.836, just one location, frequency. And we turn the audio back up. Well, the few stations that I could hear are not there anymore. Of course, band conditions for shortwave have been terrible lately. I say lately, for the past 3 or 4 months. But a few minutes ago, when I started to set up for this show, I was getting quite a few signals. Most of them appear to be local. I mean, local in Florida, because conditions are not that good. Now, the other thing is, when tuning single sideband, you need a pretty good radio. If you've got a very inexpensive radio that does have single sideband, and it's got a little small, say a rotary button on the side to tune with, it's going to be difficult. It's going to be very difficult. Now, there's also now 2 methods in which they implement single sideband function. This radio, this is the Grundig 500. This is 750. I was just looking at the Grundig 500s. This radio has a separate knob for fine-tuning in those single sideband stations, and it's down here, and it's marked SSB BFO, beat frequency oscillator, and that's how the whole concept of single sideband works. Is you don't use the carrier that normally comes along with a signal, you use this other carrier that's built into the radio to beat against that sideband signal to decode. And when you're not using that mode, say you have a radio that doesn't have single sideband mode, again, I'm no expert, so I could be making mistakes here, and feel free to correct me. If you have a radio that doesn't have single sideband, and you're listening or trying to listen to a station that is broadcasting in single sideband, you may hear the signal and it sounds maybe like they're talking like Donald Duck or something. It's quack, 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 blah, blah, blah. You can't understand them. So that's where you need single sideband to decode that signal. I'll call it decode. So let me see if I can find a station here. Okay, that's what I mean by sounding like Donald Duck. So I've got it in the single sideband mode, and of course there are two single sideband modes. There's an upper and lower. I've got it in this particular band, the 80-meter band. They normally operate in lower sideband mode. As you go up in frequency on the shortwave bands, they switch from lower to upper. So now I'm going to try to tune in for you, and I'll try to shut up so you can hear it. Wouldn't you know it, I jabbered so long they're gone. Let me see if I can find another one. Now, I've got about 3/4 scale of noise this morning, so only the real strong signals will get through.
I got enough grounding wire to do the job. I said, where are the burning clamps? And she said, what? I said, burning clamps, for clamping to your ground.
Now, as I was saying before, to tune single sideband, you need a pretty good radio. And what I mean by that is related to single sideband. You need a radio that is easy to tune and to fine tune. This radio has a button down here to tune fast, what they call fast and slow, which is fast is to tune with increments of 5 kilohertz. Slow is within increments of 1 kilohertz. Some even more expensive radios than this one, especially your amateur radios, will tune down to hertz. They will turn down to hertz, so you can really tune in that station. And then the same thing with the BFO over here on this radio. It has to be pretty wide so that you can tune in by tweaking that thing and getting the voice correct. So that's the important things about single sideband. So you could have, say, like a little portable radio that has a single sideband function, and it may not work that good, and you might have a lot of difficulty tuning the station in so you can understand the people. Now, the other type of radio, and I don't know if I mentioned it, is one that doesn't use a separate BFO knob or tuning knob here. and the newer ones don't use it. That function is automatically built in for varying that BFO by just using the main tuning knob. This radio is what I call old school, which has a separate knob. Some people like it with the separate knob. They feel it's easier to tune having that, I'll call it fine tuning, although it's the BFO tuning knob. So let me turn the audio back up and quit babbling and let you listen, and I'll kind of play with the BFO and the tuning knob.
All the way up to the top, and you can control the so then you mount the antenna on. Well, enough worked out to breaking the studs right off. The anchors. Project was on hold for a week till they could locate some American ones.
Okay, if you've kind of gotten the frequency centered on to the frequency that they're using, then, and you normally want to start out with this BFO knob in this case, center position or zero position, which is straight up, and that way you can tune each side of that frequency that you dialed in. Also, you can, once you get the frequency in and you've got the BFO close, if your tuning has very high resolution, like this one only has, the highest is 1 kilohertz. If you had one that was 1 hertz or 1/10 of a kilohertz, you could use the tuning knob to fine tune it in. You wouldn't just have to use the BFO. So that's another method of tuning. Again, if you're going to listen or try to listen to single sideband stations, you really need a pretty good radio. And what I mean by pretty good radio, you have to have good tuning. Now this has got this huge tuning dial, that helps. It will tune down to 1 kilohertz. So you want 1 kilohertz or lower fine tuning. Some radios may have a main tuning knob and a fine tuning knob to get you that accuracy. And then you either can have a radio with a separate BFO to tune in the voice so you can understand it, or that function might be built into the main tuning that when you select single sideband, just use the main tuning knob. So those are the things to look for in single sideband listening. And like I say, there's a lot of stuff on single sideband, but it's a little touchy to tune, so you gotta have some patience in tuning. Like I say, there's other things, like if you want to listen to pirate radios, which are in the United States, they're on 6.9 megahertz to 7.0 megahertz, and they're usually transmitting on weekends. If you want to do that, most of them, almost all of them, transmit on single sideband, so you'll need a single sideband radio. Some of your military, like the Air Force, HF communications is done using single sideband. So that's it. If you have any questions, or if you have any corrections, I could have said here something that's wrong, please correct me, and I would appreciate that. If you enjoyed the show, please give me a thumbs up. Thanks for watching. Have a great day. Bye-bye.